Welcome back to another edition. And I am delighted to have Jillian Knight with me today. Met Jillian at the Financial Therapy Conference in Charlotte, North Carolina, which is the state in which she lives and practices. Are you in Charlotte, Jillian?
No, I'm in Raleigh.
Okay,
it's about 2.5 hours.
2.5 hours drive?
Mm-hmm.
In South Dakota, that's next door. And we had a fascinating discussion. And so I think I just want to start, Jillian, by you introducing yourself, what you do, your passion, and then along with that, tell us how you got into financial therapy, and that might lead us right into the topic.
Oh, I have a feeling it definitely most definitely. Yeah, sure. So I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. And I have been practicing for about 10 years now. I worked in a bunch of different settings. And during that time, so right now I have recently established a financial therapy practice. So, and I'm working on sort of a separate business to be able to provide coaching and do more sort of speaking and like live events. And my focus is really on women and sort of the ways in which women have sort of traditionally stayed sort of small and not really like the financial system wasn't really designed for women, right? And so we're making progress for sure, but there's still a lot of ways in which we sort of are impacted financially by just even the way that our society and culture are set up. And I see sort of like the individual impacts that has on women. And so that's also part of my story, is also why I would be focusing on women, right? So how I got here, I grew up in Florida, actually. And I grew up sort of lower middle class, I would call it. We had what we needed and a little of what we wanted, but not as much as like some of my friends who clearly had more financial means than we did. And I didn't learn anything about money because my parents didn't know a whole lot, at least not that they shared. And I ended up going to college. I was the first one in my family to sort of go off to like a 4-year college and to have expectations that like I would probably go on to graduate school and have sort of a career. And because my family didn't know a whole lot about that process or about things like student loans, I ended up taking out a lot of student loans. I went out of state to go to undergrad. So I came up here to North Carolina and took out sort of all the loans they would give me to go to 4 years out of state. I never did get any kind of in-state. And then I went out of state again for grad school, and I picked the most expensive one of all the ones I applied to because it was a good school and I'll just get a job one day and pay it back. That's just like the mindset. And so then I went to grad school for 3 years and met my husband in college. He grew up with about the same, maybe even less than I had. He went to law school and took out student loans for a private law school. So by the time we got married, we knew that money was something that neither one of us really had figured out yet. I tended to be more money avoidant, and he tended to, I I guess he would have been probably more like money vigilant. Like he really would sort of just like didn't want to spend money, and there was sort of this like anytime I spent money was like a problem. So we knew when we got married that me being the marriage and family therapist that I am, was like, all right, we're gonna have to talk about how we're gonna figure out this whole differences in money thing, because there's a good chance this could, be a problem down the road or continue to be a problem.
Yeah, two very, very extreme categories of money scripts, right? Money
Right.
avoidant, money vigilant.
Right. Yeah. And so I didn't necessarily spend a whole lot of money. I wasn't like racking up a ton of credit card debt or anything, but like any spending, to someone who is like money vigilant or really holds on to money, feels like it feels that way. It feels like it's an excessive amount of money is for like any money spent on anything that's like seen as frivolous or impulsive. So we are in North Carolina. We're in the South, and there's still a lot in the South that is very conservative. And one of those things is Dave Ramsey, and his sort of total money makeover financial peace thing program. And we had his book. I think we had either gotten it or someone gave it to us. He was sort of like the loudest voice in personal finance at the time. This was 7 years ago. And it's in churches and it's sort of everywhere. And we had heard family members had done it and had paid down some debt. And so anyway, I like read the book in a weekend, and I told my husband, like, we need to do this. Like, we need to do something. So we're going to do this. And he was on board because, I was the spender. And so, yeah, we jumped in the Kool-Aid, of Dave Ramsey's plan. And the reason we did was because we added up our student loan debt and we had $364,000 in student loan.
Wow.
And we were making 95 combined.
Wow.
Yeah. So talk about like financial trauma that I didn't realize was financial trauma until later. So it was like, it was like just a very like overwhelming, hopeless sort of, what did we get ourselves into? How are we going to get ourselves out? Sort of feeling. And so that's why we really like, we kind of clung on to something. We needed something to sort of get us out of that. And so, we jumped into the plan. We did 3 years of just like total deprivation. We paid down a ton. We were not student loan free, but we paid down a whole lot of student loans. And we thought it was like the best thing ever. And we even helped teach a class at one point. And I would listen to his radio show. And I would hear things like, so this is kind of where it turned. I would hear things.
I had a sense it was going to turn when you used the word Kool-Aid.
Yeah. So it's a very, I don't really know all the words that I want to use to describe it yet, but
you said you were listening to the radio when it turned?
Yeah. Well, so I would listen to his radio show, and people would do these like debt-free screams. Like when you're debt-free, you go on his show and you tell your story, and then you scream, "I'm debt-free."
Yeah.
And everybody claps, and it's this like big celebration thing, which just like reinforces this like, if you just like are self-disciplined enough and you don't do anything stupid, literally using that language, then you will get to this place and you will be like these people who are so happy, and we will celebrate you. And until then, like, don't go on vacation, don't eat at a restaurant, like, don't do anything fun, focus on making more money and paying down more debt. And so it was it was working in that we were putting money towards our debt and we were more aware of where our money was going. And um, I would listen to his radio show and I would hear things that, like, values that I didn't agree with, or sort of like gender norms and roles. And there wasn't a lot of diversity on his show. And so I would always think, like, okay, well, I don't agree with that part of it, but I can kind of set it aside and listen to his financial advice because I didn't know any better, right? Like, he was this, like older male, like he could be my uncle sort of thing, where he has all this, you see him as like having all of this wisdom and like you just don't know any of this. And he is just teaching you all of these things and guiding you. And and eventually in 2020, when the world sort of literally and figuratively caught on fire, um, the way that he responded to what was going on in the country with Black Lives Matter, with anything having to do with race, systemic racism being a thing. His responses to that really just sort of solidified for me, like, I can't listen to this anymore. Um, and I had been part of a community on Instagram actually that started out as a community of people who were following him, and then slowly people started doing other things and doing, like, investing to begin with, and saving more than $1,000 in an emergency fund. And so I could kind of see that it was because I was in this other community, like, I could see that it was possible that there were other ways to do this, and probably better and more balanced ways, that we didn't have to just, like, that there was a better way. Like, we didn't just have to, like, deprive ourselves of every, joy in the moment for some, like, eventual, one day we can be happy when our debt's paid off, sort of. That's sort of the mindset. So um that really led me to, like, thinking about how all of that really impacted my thinking around money. And it's taken some, like, of my own personal work to sort of unravel and sort of separate from this. Like, for the longest time, even after I wasn't listening to it, it was like, is it okay that I buy this thing? Like, it was sort of, it's very shaming, and it causes you to really, my experience anyway was, it really caused me to, like, shame myself for anything that didn't fit in the rules, or on the plan. And then it also caused me, and my husband really, to judge other people, who were not following the plan, who had a car payment, or who, like, weren't trying to pay down their student loans any faster. So that's my very long story about how I got here, and why, some of the reasons why I have a really hard time with that whole program.
So you were involved in that community and actually taught in some capacity, were in a leadership role in teaching the classes.
Briefly.
So the the realization or trigger for you was the 3 years of deprivation. And I'm guessing there are going to be many more years of deprivation needed to be one of those that screamed, I'm debt free. Would I be right with that if you had followed the plan?
If we had followed the plan, we probably would have had to do at least at least 3 more years of deprivation. But then we also were thinking about starting a family and or growing our family to include a child. And then we did get pregnant in 2020, and that sort of shifts your thinking about things, right? And so yeah, we started, yeah, we would have had to do at least 3 more years of sort of the whole deprivation lifestyle.
So then you started seeing some people in other communities. I'm guessing that maybe were Dave Ramsey followers that started to do things different or in some way break away.
Mm-hmm.
And was that somewhat the crack for you that caused you to question that, along with how are we going to raise a child and being in deprivation?
Yeah. I think it was sort of that combination of seeing these other people in this community um, who um, who were not following the plan anymore, or they were sort of doing it, but they weren't really following it because they were sort of following it, but then adjusting it to be more reasonable.
Mhm.
And at first your initial reaction is like you're not following the plan, so good luck with that, right? Like, I
Mhm.
hope that works out for you. But then the more people I saw, and people started saying, pointing out things about the plan, that I was like, yeah, no, that does make sense. Like, we do need more than $1,000 or $2,000 in an emergency fund, especially with as much student loan debt as we had. Um, and then, you know, starting to listen to people who were investing, because with sort of the baby steps that he has, you don't start even investing in retirement at all until after all of your non-mortgage debt is paid off. And so for a lot of people, that could potentially be a lot of time that you're missing out on, having like compounding interest of your money going into retirement. Um, and um, so I started to sort of see the logic in the other ways that people were doing it. And by that time, we had already been doing it for like, was it 3 years? Just over 3 years at that point. So we had sort of um, built some, we had built some, like, we had the awareness at that point, and we had the ability to make decisions with money, whereas before we just sort of didn't. And so we were able to start to trust ourselves that, like, okay, like, we can figure this out. Like, we are highly educated people. This is not that hard. And just started to think, even, okay, if how much money would we want to have in an emergency fund to feel comfortable enough for now. And so we moved that from $2,000 to 3 months of expenses. Um, and just doing that, like, made us a lot less anxious about money. And so that showed us, like, okay, like, that feels really good. What else can we do? And so it was just sort of this process of starting to trust ourselves and not um, not feeling like we had to follow anybody else's plan anymore. That was sort of like freeing for
And
sure.
so that was against the plan.
Hmm.
And, I mean, that was some rebelliousness.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So how was it? I mean, I'm wondering how entrenched in the community you were. How was it when you left, or was it that start? Did you just kind of fade away, or what did you receive anything from the members who stayed in the plan?
So no, I don't think we really had it. It was the start of the pandemic. So when we were fully just like, okay, we're not gonna really follow this anymore, or when we really started to not follow it. And so there really wasn't a lot of, we had actually just finished helping with the only class that we did help with. So that was the beginning of 2020. I think it ended in like February, right? And then the world shut down in March. And so then there really wasn't an opportunity to like really be all that involved in any community, except for online, which we posted. So it was on Instagram. It was sort of a group of people in what's called the debt-free community, is what it was titled. And we would all sort of post about like, this is how much I spent on groceries this week, and this is how much I have left on my student loans, and sort of like just that shared experience of like talk. Even that was like, we were talking about money, and not everybody does that. Um, but I think because we had something like 6,000 followers at one point, which now I'm like, wow, that was a lot. I only have 500 myself at the moment. So, but it was this whole community, right? So you were all sort of adding each other, and it was this whole big thing. So, we started, once we stopped really following the plan, I really started posting less. And I don't know if that was I wasn't keeping up with it, or it was because I didn't really want to be putting out like what we were actually doing. Yeah, I'm not really sure why I stopped. I definitely stopped when I had a baby, because it's just hard to do anything when you have a baby. But and then, the costs of having a child, you can't anticipate always. So
What would you say, or what would you say to somebody who's in the same position you are, who's looking for somebody with some answers? Or I mean, what's the danger? What's the downside of following Dave's advice? And I'll say that I've had good things to say about him in a couple of my books. That's maybe before I knew. For example, and correct me if I'm wrong, one of his tenets is you start with the smallest debt first, and you pay that off, and then you go to the next largest. When, as a financial planner, when you do the math, you should start with the debt that has the highest interest rate first, because financially, always you'll end up with more. And I know he says, well, it's the motivation. You've got to have the motivation. I read other research that said, well, the human brain left to its own will always go for the smallest debt first, just because of cognitive biases.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not rocket science. That's just normal cognitive biases, where we go. But what would you say to somebody? What's the downside?
Yeah. Side note, I would say a lot of what he teaches is not rocket science. So I would say, I really felt like a couple things. I felt like doing the whole deprivation thing for 3 years, sticking to a budget like dollar by dollar, and not adding in a whole lot of enjoyment in life. One, it impacts your mental health. And it impacts your relationships, which also impact your mental health. So we had started, so we live in the same city where we went to college. And so we had, after we finished with school, we had friends in the area from college, and we really started seeing them less and less, because in order to see them, we had to get dinner or we had to get drinks, or and we started to say like, oh, we can't do that because it's not in the budget. And we used to, like, we just didn't do things. We didn't see people. And that was even before COVID. So then COVID, and it was like, okay, so just years and years of no social activity. And so I would say it impacted our relationships in terms of how much we saw people and engaged in time with people. Um, and then I would say, like, it, I can't speak for my husband, but I know in terms of my own mental health, just sort of um, feeling like it was just such a big number and that was going to take us such a long time to pay it off, which meant such a long time until we could feel a sense of relief or sense of freedom or like happiness. And like, it felt good to pay off loans when we did. That part felt good. Um, but it just still remained this like big, heavy sort of weight that just sort of weighs on you, like mentally and emotionally. Um, that um, that I wouldn't, wish on anyone. And so when whenever I talk about it, I'll get the response of like, yeah, but he's helped so many people get out of debt. And I know that to be true, um, because I'm one of those people. I think we have just over $100,000 left in student loans, which
Wow.
is like, we could have been further along, but we also are a lot happier. So that's the trade-off. Um, so uh, so when I hear that, my response is yes, and at what cost, right? So just because you pay off the debt, like, what about how you felt that whole time while you were doing it? And how likely is it that it's going to be like in long term in your best interest, emotionally and psychologically? Um, and so I actually, something that I heard recently, I made a huge connection to my experience with Dave Ramsey, and it sort of answers that question too, which is, um, so my husband and I have a toddler, and toddlers are very challenging. And we are in a like group coaching program for parents, just to sort of understand. I have some understanding, right? Because I'm a marriage and family therapist. I learned about child development, but my husband's an attorney. So trying to kind of catch him up to speed on child development, what's expected, why kids do what they do, behavioral things. And um, one of the things that they said in one of the trainings recently was, you'll have parents say that they use certain forms of punishment, and that their children, like, they received punishments when they were a kid, and look how they turned out, right? They turned out fine. um or using punishment might sort of um change the behavior in the short term, but what's the cost of that, right? And so what the punishments don't get at, um, are the child's underlying needs and any kind of skills that they still need to develop. So I heard this in the car the other day, and I was like, this is brilliant because it explains my experience of Dave Ramsey's program so well, and why it's a problem, because it's a punishment based system, not a
So,
system that helps you develop skills. Not really. Um, and it doesn't get at your underlying needs when it comes to money.
So
I'd love to know your thoughts.
we're going to leave this episode right there.
Okay.
And we'll come back and finish this next week.
Sounds good.
Okay.